I returned to a house that remembered everything but me. The gravel crunched under my boots as I stepped out of the cab. Porch lights glowed like watchful eyes in the twilight, casting long shadows over the worn wooden steps. Everything looked just like I left it: trimmed hedges, that ridiculous garden gnome in the flower bed, the faded wind chime made of old silver spoons. But something was off. It wasn't the structure that had changed. It was the air, the way it no longer carried my name. I held the key in my hand for a second too long before sliding it into the lock. It clicked effortlessly like muscle memory. But when I opened the door, the warmth I expected didn't follow. There was no scent of cinnamon or dust, no dog barking at my return, no mother in the kitchen shouting for me to wipe my boots. Just silence, and the hum of something unfamiliar. A row of shoes lined the hallway, none of them mine. On the coat rack, a lavender puffer jacket and a set of yoga mats leaned against the wall. My boots felt heavier. They didn't belong here anymore. Neither did I. I heard clinking glasses and polite laughter from the back of the house. I followed the voices like a stranger at her own wake. Judith, never mom in my adult vocabulary, stood in the kitchen arranging hors d'oeuvres on a slate platter dressed in her usual shade of grayscale. She looked up then down like she'd spotted a speck on her floor. "Elena." She said it like a diagnosis. "You came." Her voice held the chill of Virginia autumn. No warmth. No welcome. "You texted me?" I replied, adjusting the strap on my duffel. "Said I should come for Dad's anniversary." She wiped her hands on a towel. "Yes, well, things have been busy. Madison's done most of the organizing." I turned just in time to see Madison sweep in, arms outstretched like a talk show host. "Oh my God, look who's back," she sang. The wanderer returns from retirement. Her hug was brief and scented with fake lavender. Her smile was just wide enough to flash her teeth. "It's not retirement," I said calmly. "It's honorable discharge." Madison blinked theatrically. Right. Technicalities." She turned to the crowd in the dining room. "Everyone, this is Elena. You know my sister. The mysterious one." A few heads turned. A few murmured welcome back without eye contact. I recognized some neighbors, maybe a cousin or two. They looked through me as if I were part of the decor, something nostalgic but no longer useful. I moved down the hallway, needing air, grounding anything. I found the door to what used to be my room. I opened it. The walls were now sage green. My posters were gone. The bed replaced with a padded mat and woven baskets. A diffuser pulsed lavender into the space. Yoga studio. A guttural laugh escaped before I could stop it. All those years I kept that room intact in my memory. The place I wrote college essays, cried over my deployment papers, stared at the ceiling wondering if I'd ever belong anywhere, and they'd turned it into a meditation den. "She needed the space," Judith said behind me, arms crossed. "We assumed you wouldn't be staying long." "I didn't assume anything," I muttered. "I just came back." Judith offered a neatly folded blanket and a spare pillow. "You can sleep in the guest room, the one by the garage, the one with no windows. No hug. No questions about the last decade of my life. Just linen." Dinner was a muted affair. Madison floated from guest to guest, radiating practiced charm. Judith remained in the background, efficient and silent. I sat at the edge of the table listening to conversations that didn't ask for my input. When the glasses were refilled and plates cleared, Madison stood with her wine glass lifted high. Her voice rang with theater. "To the ones who stayed," she announced, "and kept this house alive." Applause. Glasses clinked. I didn't raise mine. My stomach twisted, but I said nothing. There was a time I'd have thrown words like daggers. Now I studied the silence, waited to understand the battlefield before striking. Madison leaned toward me, a smirk curving the edge of her mouth. "You're lucky we didn't sell this place. Imagine where you'd be." They spoke about me in past tense like I had already been buried. The conversation floated over the fireplace, curling into the ceiling like smoke. I stood at the edge of the living room, half listening, fully aware. I didn't need to be included in the dialogue to feel the weight of it pressing on my chest. They spoke around me, through me, as though I were some war-torn statue to be admired, pitied, then conveniently forgotten. "She's here for the memorial, I suppose?" asked Mrs. Reyes, smoothing the front of her floral blouse as if preparing to deliver condolences. "Of course," Madison said, her voice dipped in sugar. She needed a change of scenery. "You know how the VA is. So rigid. They almost didn't let her go. We're just grateful she's stable now." Stable. I took a sip of lukewarm coffee, staring at the framed botanical print on the wall. I'd stopped flinching at insults delivered with velvet gloves. This was just another performance. And I was the prop. They were rewriting the script without me. "Oh, the military," said Mr. Hall, his voice cracking like old vinyl. "Tough system. Hard to come back from that and do normal things." Madison laughed softly. "She has a pension at least. Not much, but it helps." There it was. The rebranding of my life distilled down to a check they thought I hadn't earned. Judith sat in her corner chair, the one with the crocheted doily draped across the back. She didn't speak. She didn't correct them. Her hands trembled slightly as she stirred her tea, but she kept her eyes low, as if silence was some kind of absolution. "She had issues, didn't she?" Mrs. Reyes asked, lowering her voice to a confidential hum. "I remember you saying something during the holidays. Issues." Madison tilted her head like a concerned social worker. "Well, it wasn't easy for her. The service does things to people. There were some delays, paperwork problems." Every sentence carved a little deeper. I wondered if they believed what they were saying or if the lies simply made the story more palatable. People preferred tragedy when it came with a bow. I stepped out onto the back porch, needing distance air. The cold nipped at my skin. The oak tree was still there, towering and indifferent, its roots stretching toward the foundation. Dad used to say it protected the house. It didn't seem to be doing much protecting these days. Inside, laughter erupted again. I stood still, letting the wind carry their words to me in broken fragments. Something about Madison holding everything together. Something about how hard she worked. How much she gave up. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I'd learned to breathe through fire. Later that night, the house had settled into its creaks and murmurs. Judith had gone to bed with her book of crossword puzzles. Madison was in the garage, rearranging God knew what for the memorial. I wandered back into the living room, drawn not by nostalgia but by instinct. The cabinet was still there beneath the window, partially hidden by a dusty potted fern. I knelt in front of it. The lock was familiar. The key had long since vanished, but I had better tools, my own memory. I eased a paperclip from a drawer nearby and bent it into shape, my fingers steady. The metal clicked on the third try. The cabinet creaked open like a breath held too long. Inside, behind some brittle manila folders, sat the deed. My name, clean and untouched, still printed across the top. Elena Marie Dawson. They could erase my room. They could smudge my face out of family stories. But the ink didn't lie. I tucked the folder back, careful, reverent. Earlier that evening, I'd stumbled on the family photo album. It was on the bottom shelf of the TV stand beside the yearbooks. I opened it slowly, half hoping to see proof I had once belonged here. Page after page had been gutted. Pictures missing, the ones that remained vacations, birthdays, graduations were either carefully cropped or framed just enough to push me out of the edge. One photo of me in uniform was still there, but flipped backward in its sleeve. I didn't turn it around. I heard the sliding door behind me. Looking for something, Judith's voice was soft but sharp. I turned, just reminding myself I exist. She didn't answer. She just looked at me like she wanted to say something but didn't know how, or didn't dare. As she walked away, I caught her murmuring, almost to herself, "You always did make things complicated." No one ever said that about Madison. Madison made things easy, tidy, simple rewritten. Later, as I passed the dining table, a neighbor brushed past me. I didn't recognize her name, but I remembered the face one of Madison's gossip circle from the church. She leaned in and whispered voice coated in misplaced sympathy. "I heard Madison had to support your mother all alone for years. Bless her heart." I didn't respond. Words were useless here. Not yet. Not like this. Instead, I walked straight to the locked cabinet where I kept the deed, and I opened it. They called me a freeloader in a house I bought with war money. The long oak dining table gleamed like it had something to prove. Crystal glasses, borrowed china, Judith's antique silver, everything arranged with surgical precision. Madison had outdone herself. Again. Every seat was filled, each guest playing their part, smiling, nodding, sipping. Laughter hovered in the air like fog, shallow, inoffensive, a cover for something more acrid underneath. I'd picked the seat at the far end near the window, half shielded by a potted fern and the strategic placement of the dessert platter. I thought maybe I'd be allowed to fade into the upholstery, but Madison had other plans. "Before we dig in," she said, lifting her glass but not yet toasting, "I think it's only appropriate we have a blessing. Elena, since you've come all this way and seen so much, would you do the honors?" The room fell into sudden stillness, the kind that makes porcelain ring and forks freeze midair. She was daring me. A prayer from the family ghost. It wasn't faith she wanted, it was a spectacle. I set down my water, slowly folded my hands as if for show. "Sure," I said. "Let's talk about sacrifice." Eyes flicked toward me. Some curious, others wary. "Bless this food," I began, voice steady, "and those who prepared it. Bless those we've lost, especially the ones who gave everything they had only to be remembered with awkward toasts and misplaced credit." A flicker ran across Madison's face. "And bless the silence," I added, "the kind that lets injustice fester quietly until it starts to rot the house it lives in." Judith flinched. I looked up just in time to catch Aunt Rose awkwardly clearing her throat. "Thank you," Madison said, cutting across my closing breath like a blade. That was heartfelt. She turned to the crowd, eyes bright with venom wrapped in velvet. "Some serve, some return broken. But what matters is that we all return." There was a pause, then laughter. Not loud, not genuine, but enough to make my stomach twist. It was the laughter of people who weren't sure whether to be amused or afraid. I scanned the table. Uncle Paul, red-cheeked and comfortably buzzed, lifted his fork and said, "Well, at least the house is still standing." Aunt Rose added, "And Elena's here." That's a miracle in itself. I guess it's easier when you don't have to pay rent. Someone muttered at the far end. They probably thought I didn't hear. They always underestimated what I heard. I didn't flinch. I didn't speak. But I catalogued every glance that darted away when I looked up. Every fake smile. Every deflection. The more they talked, the more invisible I became. Not because they ignored me, but because they were building a new version of me. One they could mock without guilt. I caught Judith's eye once. She looked down at her plate. Then the doorbell rang. Madison looked confused, then annoyed. "Who's that? I thought everyone was already." "I'll get it," I said, already rising. When I opened the door, I saw him. Connor stood there with one hand in his jacket pocket, the other holding a bottle of cheap wine. His hair was still military short, but the rest of him had relaxed since I last saw him. He grinned like he knew exactly what kind of chaos he was walking into. "Wrong address?" I asked. "Nope," he said. "Your sister texted me the invite. Said she was being inclusive, but I figured you'd need a buffer." Madison's footsteps clicked behind me. She froze when she saw him. "Connor," she said, voice brittle. "How Unexpected. He held up the wine. Cabernet. Wasn't sure what paired well with tension and betrayal. Judith appeared behind her. Connor. You remember Elena's cousin? She asked too quickly. He smiled like a wolf in a suit. Oh, I remember exactly who everyone is. At the table, Madison resumed control, introducing him to those who didn't remember him from childhood visits. Connor's an old family friend, she said with polish. He just happened to be in the area. I let her have her lie. Connor took the seat next to me without asking. The rest of the dinner blurred into strained conversations and laughter that never quite reached the eyes. I didn't eat much. Just watched. Listened. Let them continue their theater while I counted every falsehood dropped like crumbs across the table. Then came the final toast. Madison stood again, glass-raised eyes glittering. To family, she said, who stay useful and sane. It was surgical. And it landed. The pause afterward wasn't long, but it was enough to make the insult clear. It was the kind of line that let her smirk without consequence, the kind that would be brushed off later as a joke. I didn't blink. Connor leaned in, lowering his voice beneath the clink of glasses. You still have the deed, right? You could fight this. I know. So why aren't you? The words hung between us like condensation in the night air, unspoken for too long and now finally gasping for oxygen. I sat on the porch steps, the wood cold and rough beneath me. Connor leaned against the railing, a can of beer sweating in his hand. The backyard stretched behind us into the shadow of the fence, beyond which the neighbors' motion sensor lights blinked like nervous eyes. The house behind us glowed with soft yellow through the curtains, full of people pretending they weren't tearing each other apart. I didn't answer right away. The silence had become armor. Connor looked at me not with pity, but with calculation. Like he was waiting for a move I hadn't made. I've seen what you're capable of, he said. This isn't you. Isn't it? I asked. Letting people assume, letting them forget. He tipped his head. That's not forgetting. That's theft. I swallowed. It's cleaner this way, I finally said. Let them think what they want. Sometimes silence cuts deeper. He exhaled through his nose, a bitter chuckle under his breath. No offense, but you don't strike me as someone who dies quietly. I looked out into the dark. Before I left for deployment, I said Dad made me promise not to let the house go. He was worried about Mom, about Madison. Said they'd find a way to twist things if he didn't make it. Connor's posture shifted. Alert now. What did he do? He wrote a second will. A sealed one. Never read it aloud. Said it would surface if anything went sideways. I never saw it. Connor was quiet for a moment. Did you check with the lawyer? I shook my head. No lawyer contacted me. I asked Mom once. She said everything had been settled, that Dad didn't leave loose ends. Bullshit. I didn't disagree. There was a long pause before he added, I checked the county record before I came. Thought it was odd your name still being listed as primary owner. I stiffened. Still. He nodded. Madison tried to file for a transfer. Last year. Got denied. The clerk flagged the title. It was never revoked. You're still the sole holder. The beer in my hand suddenly felt too warm. She told everyone I signed it over, I whispered. Connor shook his head. She lied. Or she tried to force it and hoped no one would look. A flicker of heat rose in my chest. It wasn't rage, not yet. It was something more focused. Like the click of a chamber before the bullet slides into place. I made her a temporary co-signer before I left, I said. Power of attorney just in case something happened. She used it to pay property tax and utilities. Nothing more. He looked at me measured. Then you still have it. The house? The leverage. From the side of my vision, I thought I saw a shift in the curtain. Just for a second. A shape behind the glass. Madison, I murmured. She's watching always. Connor followed my gaze but didn't flinch. If you don't reclaim it, she'll find another way. They always do. The wind pressed against my back like a nudge. I rose, brushing dust from my jeans, and walked back inside. The house was still noisy, but the sounds were softer now, dishes clinking, murmurs trailing off. Judith was gone. Madison nowhere to be seen. I climbed the stairs with steady feet, crossed the hallway where my name used to be taped to the door, and entered what used to be mine. The yoga mats were gone, replaced with an empty suitcase on the bed, open like a wound. I sat at the desk and opened my laptop. The screen blinked to life. No notifications, no family group chat, no welcome home messages, just the cold blankness of the browser. I typed slowly, deliberately. Virginia Property Ownership Verification Form. Sometimes the best revenge is letting them talk right before you pull the rug. The smell of coffee brewing didn't belong to my mother. Judith wasn't the type to wake early and fill the house with warmth. That had always been Dad. Since he died, the kitchen in the mornings felt like a set, lights on, props arranged, but no one really living in it. I stood by the island watching the black liquid drip steadily into the carafe. Connor sat across from me, elbows on the counter, flipping through a folder. Pages brushed against each other like quiet threats. "Everything's printed," he said, eyes scanning line by line. "Property, title, power of attorney, history, and Dad's sealed, will scanned and notarized just like we hoped." I nodded, setting 2 mugs in front of us. "Leave the originals in the study. Top drawer. The old oak one Dad wouldn't let anyone touch." Connor looked up. "Think Madison will check. She'll be too busy preparing her victory speech." His smirk matched mine. The coffee finished with a hiss. I poured 2 cups, took mine black. Downstairs, the printer hummed its last page, and I heard Connor get up to gather everything. I turned to the kitchen window, letting the heat of the mug steady my hands. Outside, the lawn had already been manicured for tomorrow's memorial. Madison insisted the garden be a reflection of legacy. What she meant was photo-ready. Judith entered quietly, like a shadow that wasn't sure it should exist in daylight. I didn't speak. Neither did she at first. She moved slowly, opened the cabinet, pulled out a mismatched mug, the one with chipped glaze from when we were kids, and filled it halfway. "I didn't know you still drank coffee," she said. I didn't stop. She leaned against the counter, not meeting my eyes. "You've always been good at hiding things." "Not always," I said. "Some things were just ignored." Her fingers tapped the ceramic. "Are you okay?" she asked. It wasn't a question of care, it was permission-seeking, like she needed me to say I was fine so she could feel less complicit. "I will be," I answered. "After tomorrow." Judith blinked, then nodded slowly, like she was agreeing to something she didn't fully understand. Connor returned folders, now inside a plain brown envelope. "I'll place this in the drawer," he said. "You want to prep the affidavit?" "Yeah. The spare mic's in the basement." We moved like clockwork. Surgical. Calculated. Every movement meant something. I followed him downstairs, the air turning cooler with each step. The basement hadn't changed, still that faint smell of dust-sealed paint and old papers. It felt like Dad's shadow still lived here. Connor set up the tripod in front of the bookshelf. I sat in the old armchair, the one that creaked every time someone leaned too far back. "When you're ready," he said. I took a breath, then nodded. "This is Elena Dawson," I began. "This statement is to clarify ownership of the Dawson property, filed originally under my name and never legally transferred." The words came out steady, each one carving a piece of the truth into permanence. Connor monitored the audio levels, watching the screen, giving me space, but making sure nothing could be challenged. When I finished, he gave a short nod. "It's airtight." I stood, brushing off the lap of my jeans, and smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It wasn't joy. It was clarity. Upstairs, the murmur of voices returned as guests trickled in and out, prepping for the big day, as Madison called it. I returned to the main floor just as the door creaked open again. Liam stood in the foyer, tall, composed, a duffel bag slung across one shoulder. "Elena," he said, surprised. "Didn't know you were here already." I hadn't seen Liam since he left for Oregon. We weren't close cousins by blood, but separated by miles and years of absence. "Just got in last week," I said. He studied me. Not just the face, everyone saw that. He looked deeper, into something I wasn't showing. "You okay?" he asked. I paused, then nodded. "Working on it." Liam set his bag down. "Well, if you need anything, sometimes people forget how much quiet hurts." I looked at him then for the first time, not as a family footnote, but a possible tether. "I'll remember that," I said. Madison swept down the stairs like a parade float in a designer dress. Her voice sliced through the stillness. "There you are," she said, to no one in particular, but looking directly at me. "I hope you're ready for tomorrow. It's going to be unforgettable." I smiled again, the same one from earlier. "I'm counting on it." She gave a tight laugh and turned to greet more guests arriving through the side door. Connor passed me near the hallway, pressing his phone into my palm before continuing upstairs. I unlocked it and read his message. "It's done. She won't see it coming. She wanted an audience. She got one." The house looked like a showroom for grief. Candles flickered on every surface, soft instrumental music looped from the wireless speakers, and framed photos of my father, carefully chosen, carefully placed, lined the walls like curated memories. Madison had left nothing to chance. Her tribute wasn't just for Dad. It was for them. The guests, the neighbors, the online viewers watching from polished smartphones as she played the role of the devoted daughter. I stood near the hallway, back straight, fingers curled lightly around a glass of untouched wine. My black dress clung to me like armor. Connor was beside the fireplace, blending into the background, his eyes sharp and scanning. Liam stood near the entry, occasionally nodding at passing guests, but mostly watching me. Judith hadn't said much all day. She looked brittle eyes, ringed with makeup too dark for mourning. She's going to make an announcement, Madison had boasted earlier in the week. I let her. People filled the living room and kitchen. Voices lowered as Madison stepped up beside the mantel, her heels clicking like gavel strikes. A subtle gesture to Connor triggered the live stream from her phone, now clipped discreetly to the tripod near the buffet table. Red light on. Microphone open. She cleared her throat. "Thank you all for coming," she began, voice velvet smooth. "Dad would have loved this. The garden, the community, the strength we've built from loss." Murmurs of agreement, a few polite nods. "I know," she continued. "Not everyone could be here in spirit or in body for the hard years. But that's okay. We who stayed, we carried him through to the end." I felt several heads turn in my direction. I didn't blink. "Especially Mom," Madison said, taking Judith's hand. "She gave everything to keep this home standing. And now she's passing it on to me." Gasps. Small, delicate theater, calibrated. The kind Madison counted on. She's trusted me to carry on the Dawson name, to ensure this house stays in the right hands. Connor moved. He crossed the room without a word, handed me a sealed folder in full view of the guests. I took it slowly. The cameras caught everything. Inside the notarized documents, the ownership file. A copy of the sealed will, Connor's affidavit, and a single-page bold font at the top, ownership status 100% Elena Dawson. I let the silence stretch until it began to ache. Then I stepped forward. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "It was never transferred," I said clearly. "You've just been squatting." Gasps again, no longer polite. The words rippled through the room, brushing against polished heels and pressed collars. I saw heads snap toward Madison. I saw Mr. Hall's eyebrows shoot up. Mrs. Reyes nearly dropped her wine glass. A couple of teenagers recording near the back froze mid-swipe. Madison's face drained of color. She started, then stopped. Her lips twitched. Her eyes searched the crowd for someone to throw her a lifeline. Judith rose unsteadily from the couch. "That's not how we see it," she said, voice strained. I didn't flinch. "Truth doesn't care about your perspective." The silence that followed was different, no longer confused. It had weight now, thick, humid, accusing. A few people began whispering. I caught the words, "legal title notarized." Madison tried to speak again, but Connor stepped beside me, a quiet barrier. Judith sat down, not in defeat, just in disbelief, like her knees finally understood the pressure her conscience had ignored. Madison stepped closer, eyes narrow, voice low. Only I heard her. "You're going to regret this." I smiled. "Not today. Some people raise walls. I file paperwork." The next morning, the sky was a dull gray, flat and different. I liked it that way. The kind of morning where facts didn't care for feelings. I parked 2 blocks from the county land records office and walked the rest. My boots clicked steadily on the pavement, matching my pulse. No hesitation, no theatrics. The fluorescent lights inside the building buzzed faintly, casting a sterile hue over the tiled floors. The waiting area smelled faintly of old paper and coffee dregs. I stepped up to the front desk and spoke clearly. "I need to verify a property title in my name and request notarized documentation." The woman behind the counter looked up. Her name tag read, "Ms. Kent," in blue ink, slightly chipped. She had kind eyes and a mouth that seemed perpetually between surprise and suspicion. "Full name?" she asked. "Elena Dawson, 143 West Haven Court, Fairfax." Her fingers flew across the keyboard. A few seconds later, her brow furrowed. "Well, that one's definitely in your name," she said slowly. "Has been since 2012. No liens, no changes recorded." I nodded once. "I need certified proof. Stamped." She narrowed her eyes slightly, not in challenge, more like curiosity. "Any specific reason I didn't answer?" "It wasn't required." A rustle behind me caught my attention. Liam leaned against the far wall, pretending to study a poster about public records access. I hadn't expected him to follow me, but I wasn't surprised either. He'd quietly offered to help when I stepped out this morning. Said nothing else, just showed up. Ms. Kent returned a moment later with a slim folder. "Here's the ownership certificate," she said, handing it over. "Stamped and dated. It includes every recorded transaction, or in this case, the lack thereof." I scanned the top line. "Clear and clean owner of record, Elena Marie Dawson." Liam stepped closer. "You should digitize that," he murmured. "Scan it, upload it, email yourself, keep a trail." I didn't respond, but I pulled out the USB drive Connor gave me, slid it into the public terminal, and began scanning each document. I sent copies to my backup email, another to a secure cloud Connor had set up during his time at law school. "This one too," Ms. Kent added, passing a second paper. "Unusual request, there's a note from 2017. Someone filed a form claiming military disappearance to transfer the title, but it was rejected outright." I felt a sharp pinch behind my ribs. Not surprise, just confirmation. "Who filed it?" She hesitated. "That's technically public, but I need to redact some of this." She handed me a redacted letter with one line bolded near the top. "Claimant Madison Dawson. Request property transfer. Due to military MIA status, outcome denied. Active ownership verified." My hands didn't tremble. I was past that. "She tried to have me declared gone," I said flatly, "so she could take what wasn't hers." Liam looked over my shoulder, his jaw tightening. Ms. Kent blinked but said nothing. I glanced up. "Can I get a certified copy of that rejection letter?" She staged a performance. I brought the receipts. The wine hadn't even finished breathing before Madison started spinning her story. We were in the living room again, but this time the air was heavier. No music, no candlelight, just low voices and the occasional clink of a teaspoon against porcelain. This was the real family, as Judith had put it earlier. The trusted few. The ones who held power by proximity. Aunt Rose, ever smiling and sharp-eyed. Uncle Paul, whose allegiance went to whichever side looked more lucrative. Liam leaned against the archway. Connor sat beside me, quiet and steady. I waited. Madison didn't. "It's all just a misunderstanding," she said sweetly, clutching her glass like a prop. "The paperwork's just outdated. We've been meaning to sort it out since Elena came back." Outdated. Like my service, my voice, my name. Connor opened the leather folder and laid out the documents on the coffee table one by one. Crisp, stamped, dated. He didn't speak until all eyes were on him. "This is the deed," he began, his voice calm but cutting. "Ownership Elena Dawson. Effective since 2012. No amendments, no transfer filings, no consents." He tapped one paragraph with a pen. "And right here, no transfer shall be processed without written and notarized consent from the current owner." Judith looked down at her hands. She hadn't said a word since I arrived. Madison scoffed. "Anyone can print paper, Connor. This doesn't prove anything except Elena's fixation on old files." I raised a brow. "Would you like to explain the MIA transfer claim you filed in 2017? Her jaw clenched, but she smiled. "I filed that at Mom's suggestion. You stopped writing." We thought. She turned to the other's, voice rising in pitch. "We thought she was gone. Disappeared. The army wasn't even sure where she was." "They were," I said evenly. "And so were you." Connor pulled another document from the folder. The rejection letter. Redacted but damning. I reached into my own envelope and unfolded a printed email. "And this," I said, "is an email chain from Madison to our old neighbor, Mrs. Sanders, dated August 2020. In it, she says, and I quote, 'Elena gave up the house. She won't be coming back.'" I stood. Mrs. Sanders. The room turned. From the hallway entered a thin figure in a lavender coat and orthopedic shoes. She looked uncertain, but her voice was clear. She told me that Mrs. Sanders confirmed, more than once, said Elena had moved on and she was finally free to take over. I didn't think much of it back then. But now... Madison laughed, breathless. "Oh, come on. This is ridiculous. You all know me. I've been here holding this family together while she was off playing soldier or ghost or whatever." Aunt Rose narrowed her eyes. "You told us Elena donated the house to you." Uncle Paul frowned. "Said it was in a trust. Legal and clean." I never said that. Madison snapped. Connor interjected. "We have emails. Audio if you'd prefer." Madison spun toward our mother. "Mom, say something." Judith looked at me. For the first time, she truly looked. Then she dropped her gaze again and said nothing. The silence cracked like bone. I stepped forward and picked up the deed. "This house is mine," I said, voice steady. "You occupied it. You disrespected it. And now you will leave it." Madison stared at me. Her cheeks flushed. Her nails dug into the fabric of the armchair. Then she smiled, a wide, sharp, theatrical smile. "You want war, sis, I'll give you one. When you've been erased, even your name tastes bitter." The cemetery was still wet with mourning. The frost hadn't yet given way to sun, and the air clung to my skin with the stubbornness of something unresolved. I parked at the far end of the lot, away from the main gates, and walked the long path between rows of sleeping names. I didn't carry flowers. I brought only a letter. The headstone stood where I remembered it, clean, sharp, cold. Lieutenant Richard Dawson, Father Soldier Anchor. They'd carved it with military precision. No frills, no poetry. Just fact. Just wait. I crouched and placed the envelope at its base, sealed with my thumbprint. "I did it, Dad. Not for the house, for me." I didn't expect an answer. I didn't come for comfort. I came to mark something invisible, like cutting a ribbon, but for a life reclaimed. I stood again, and for the first time since I returned, I let my shoulders drop. The air didn't grow lighter, but my stance did. Just slightly. I heard the crunch of gravel before I saw her. Judith approached in silence, her black coat drawn tight, her hands clasped in front of her like a mourner's prayer. We stood a few feet apart facing the same stone. She didn't look at me. "I didn't know you'd come this early," she said, her voice small, dry like paper. I said nothing. She shifted. "I used to visit every Sunday, but lately, I don't know. The house feels different without him. Quieter, but not kinder." Still, I said nothing. We stood in the weight of frost and ghosts. Finally, she exhaled long and low. "I didn't know how to defend you without losing her." The wind moved through the trees above rustling leaves that never asked for permission to fall. My fingers curled in my coat pocket. I didn't look at her. I thought if I kept things steady, if I didn't choose sides, maybe it would settle. Maybe Madison would stop needing to prove so much. "She never stopped," I replied. My voice came from someplace deeper than my throat. Judith nodded. "No, she didn't." We stood a little longer. The quiet between us was not warm, but it was honest. Flashback, I remembered my father once saying back before the final deployment, "Nothing worth keeping is ever easily kept." He meant the Navy, the house, maybe even the family. At the time, I had laughed. Now I understood it was a warning. Back in the present, Judith's shoulders trembled. She bit the inside of her cheek hard enough to draw color. "You were never the problem," she whispered. "I was just too tired to see." Tears welled, but she blinked them away. She didn't wipe her face. She just stood there, cracked open for the first time. I didn't hug her. I didn't reach out. The grass between us remained unstepped. I stared at the headstone one last time, then turned, boots crunching softly as I walked away. "Goodbye, Mom," I said without looking back. I didn't want justice. I wanted air, and they were suffocating me. The library still smelled like old varnish and ghosts. Once my father's study, it had been converted into something warmer, more bookshelves, less command. But the bones were still his. The desk solid oak. The mounted photograph of his unit. The locked safe behind the bookshelf where he kept things he couldn't say out loud. I sat across from Connor, sunlight pooling between us. The afternoon felt deceivingly gentle. Nothing about today was soft. He folded his hands. "So here's where we are," he said. "You can file for an eviction, sue for damages, go full scorched earth if you want. Or I just take my air back." Connor raised an eyebrow. "No courts, no revenge. Just removal." I looked down at the envelope he'd placed in front of me, official, sealed, precise. "I want her out, not destroyed." He nodded as if he'd expected that. "This notifies Madison she has 14 days to vacate. No legal battle unless she wants to start one." I took the pen from my father's antique holder. It still held black ink, dry at the tip, but usable. I turned it once in my fingers, then signed Elena M. Dawson. Connor added a second document, a termination of joint tenancy agreement. "This removes any assumption of co-ownership. It reaffirms full legal title in your name alone. She'll get a copy." I signed again. The sound of my name scratching across legal paper felt heavier than gunfire. Liam leaned in the doorway. I hadn't heard him come in. "Everything okay?" he asked. Connor stood. "More than okay. She's taking back her life." Liam looked at me. "What do you feel?" I didn't answer right away. I glanced at the window where autumn leaves pressed their red palms against the glass like someone begging to be let in or out. Like I'm finally writing the story myself. I waited until they left. Then I opened the shelf behind the desk and keyed in the code, still the same birthdate, mine. The safe opened with a slow, solid thunk. Inside, neatly folded, was a letter I hadn't touched in over a decade. My father's handwriting was unmistakable, sharp strokes, unforgiving, deliberate. You've always been the strong one, even if we were too blind to see it. The house is yours. Because legacy isn't about blood, it's about who holds the line when no one else can. I sat there for minutes, maybe longer, letting the words pull breath back into my lungs. This wasn't about Madison. It never had been. It was about the heir I had been forced to give up, and my choice now to take it back. As I refolded the letter and locked it away again, Connor stepped back inside. He must have seen the change on my face because he didn't ask what I found. Instead, he said, "We're not done yet. You still have the right to decide what this house becomes." And just like that, the question shifted from surviving in this house to transforming it. She thought I was bluffing, until the movers arrived. I watched the clock tick past 2:59. Outside the front window, autumn hung heavy in the air, sunlight dappled through brittle red oak leaves. The kind of silence that settles before something ends, or begins again. At precisely 3:00 p.m., a low rumble approached from the corner. A white moving truck crept down the street and rolled to a stop in front of the house. It idled there for a moment, engine humming like a held breath. I didn't move from the chair by the window. Inside, the air was tense. Connor stood in the hallway, clipboard in hand, calm as a surgeon. Two uniformed movers waited by the door, respectful but unreadable. They had the paperwork, the signatures, and the green light. Madison still hadn't packed a thing. She came down the stairs in a frenzy, hair disheveled, eyes, wild disbelief curling off her like smoke from a dying fire. "What the hell is this?" she spat. "You think you can just toss me out like yesterday's trash?" Connor didn't answer. He handed me the notarized confirmation from the county clerk's office. I placed it gently on the table between us. 14 days, I said softly. You had them. You're serious, she hissed. This is my home. No, I said. It was my house. You lived here. There's a difference. She turned to Connor, desperate. Is this even legal? Connor raised an eyebrow. You were served. You acknowledged receipt. You didn't contest. The law sees no ambiguity. The movers stepped forward. Madison flinched. Don't touch my things. We won't, one of them said. You can supervise the packing. We'll follow your lead. She laughed, bitter and breathless. Unbelievable. You're actually doing this. I stood and walked toward her, slow and deliberate. You chose this, I said. When you told everyone I was a parasite. When you tried to take what was never yours. Madison's voice broke. You're heartless. No, I said, pausing just a breath from her. You had mine. You burned it. She froze. The words hit her like glass. For a second, I saw something almost human behind her fury, a crack in the mask. Regret, maybe, but not enough to matter now. She stormed upstairs, slamming the door so hard the picture frames rattled. Connor looked at me. You good? I nodded. Better than I've been in years. The movers began quietly boxing up what was clearly hers clothing. Yoga mats, decorative mugs with affirmations she'd never earned. Madison returned an hour later, dragging 2 bags behind her, sunglasses on defiance wrapped around her like armor. At the door, she paused. Fine, she said, voice like dry ice. You win, but you'll be alone in that damn house. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. She walked out, and with her, a weight I hadn't known I was still carrying. When the truck pulled away, the silence that returned wasn't suffocating, it was clean. Uncluttered. Mine. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was trespassing in my own life. It's strange when silence finally returns. You realize what it had been drowning out. The house exhaled when she left. No more footsteps overhead. No artificial peppermint candles. No distant yoga playlists drifting through walls I never gave her permission to decorate. Just silence. It sat thick in the corners, creeping under doorways, clinging to the hardwood like dust that didn't want to be swept. I stood in the living room, the same room where they'd laughed at me toasted without me tried to erase me. Now stripped of voices and judgment, it felt cavernous, empty, but not lifeless. Mine. The old clock on the wall ticked with the steadiness of a heartbeat, its pendulum keeping time for something long buried. I opened the safe again. Not for documents this time. For the letter. The one my father wrote folded into a creased envelope stained faintly with age and oil from his fingers. "This house is yours," he'd written. "So is its silence. Learn how to live in it." I sat on the floor. Not on a chair. Not at the desk. Just the floor, cross-legged, the letter open in my lap. The quiet stretched long and warm across the space, no longer suffocating just there. But silence too remembers. Flash. Heat. Metal. Screaming. No sound. I was back in Kandahar, the dust choking and unreal. The explosion had hit close, too close. My ears rang for days. The world became distant, slow, dreamlike. The worst part wasn't the chaos. It was the soundlessness afterward, like death had sucked all noise into itself. That same high-pitched hum hovered now in my ears, a ghost of that moment. Not painful, just present. I reached for the radio on the shelf, one of Dad's old relics. I turned the dial. Nothing. Static. Buzz. White noise like ocean waves filtered through concrete. It filled the room but didn't offer company. I turned it off. I let the silence return, and then I did something I hadn't done in years. I breathed. Not shallow, not guarded. A full inhale all the way to the base of my lungs and an exhale that left no apology behind. This wasn't just about walls and windows. It never was. It was about taking space, not just physically, but emotionally, psychologically. A kind of reclamation that courts and paper couldn't document. I looked around the bare room. No decorations, no distractions. Just me and the quiet. The real kind. The kind that didn't demand performance. I closed my eyes, whispered into the air like a vow. It's mine. All of it. Even the quiet. The doorbell rang. A sharp, sudden sound, foreign, unwelcome. I stood, legs stiff, heart thudding without rhythm. It was nearly 9 p.m. When I opened the door, Connor stood there, coat still, on expression unreadable. In his hand, a thick manila envelope. "You need to see this," he said. I took it, the weight of it familiar. Paper, power, trouble. "She filed a counterclaim," he added. "Today." I didn't flinch. Didn't speak. I stepped aside and let him in. The silence between us, no longer comfort, no longer peace. Now it was anticipation. Justice doesn't always rest, and neither do they. The office was too bright. Fluorescent lighting washed everything in a sterile glow, erasing softness. No windows, no distractions. Just paper, glass, and tension thick enough to slice. Connor's office was usually a place of strategy, of quiet confidence. But today, it was war. He slid the thick folder across the table to me. "Filed this morning. Civil court. Your sister's suing for emotional damages, harassment, and unlawful eviction." I didn't blink. "She's arguing elder care displacement," he continued, claiming she had nowhere else to go and was forced from her only residence. I exhaled slowly, keeping my voice flat. "She's 3 years younger than me." Connor smirked without humor. "Doesn't matter. The legal term they're clinging to is co-residential caregiver. She's alleging you forced her out without regard for her well-being." "She forced herself in," I said. "And you have the paperwork to prove it," he replied, more to the room than to me. "Still, their goal isn't to win. It's to drag you through it. Make noise. Make you look cruel." The other lawyer sat across from us, composed, polished, not a single emotion slipping past her tight expression. Her presence was like a scalpel, cold, clinical, and designed to cut. Liam arrived 5 minutes late, quietly sliding into the seat beside me. His presence was wordless reassurance. A lighthouse. A tether. I handed Connor the folder I'd prepared: notarized ownership records, backup files, Sanders's signed statement, dated email threads. Here, I said. Everything. He nodded, skimming through. This crushes the timeline, and the affidavit undercuts their claim of residency. You were more than generous. He turned to me. We could counter. Defamation. False claim of ownership. Malicious possession. Easy win. I stared at the glossy surface of the conference table. My reflection stared back, older, steadier, weathered. I thought about my father, about the quiet of the house, about how long I'd waited for that space to be mine again. Then I shook my head. No, I said. I already won. I'm not setting fire to ash. Connor tilted his head as if surprised but not disapproving. The opposing lawyer raised an eyebrow. So, you're withdrawing all countersuits? Not quite. I reached into my folder and pulled out one last document, a simple statement with a signature line at the bottom. She signs this affidavit, I said, sliding it across the table, acknowledging that the house was never hers, that she fabricated residency rights, and that her actions led to unnecessary legal escalation. The woman scanned the page. Her lips tightened. And if she refuses, she won't, I said, standing. Because if she does, then I will burn what's left. There was silence. Not the heavy, haunted kind, but one made of respect. I looked at Liam. He smiled, slightly proud. As I turned toward the door, I left my final condition on the table without looking back. She signs it and stays away. The house was quiet now. But so was I, for the right reasons. Sunlight spilled through the living room windows like it had been waiting for this moment. Not timid or tentative, but bold, confident. It touched the hardwood floors, swept over the empty corners, and illuminated a space that was no longer haunted. I'd cleared every trace of her. The peppermint candles, the wall decals. The self-help books left open like traps. Gone. In their place, blueprints. Real ones. My hand-drawn sketches taped to the wall corners, curling slightly. A reading nook under the window. Refinished floors in Dad's old study. No yoga room. Just space to think, to be. Liam stood on a ladder, his shirt streaked with paint, humming something tuneless while brushing a fresh coat of sage green onto the wall. Are you staying? He asked without turning. I didn't answer right away. Not because I didn't know, but because I wanted the answer to land. Yes, I said finally. But not the way they think. I'm not staying out of anger. He climbed down, paint smudged on his cheek. Then why? Because this place deserves someone who sees it as more than property. He nodded, not asking more. That was Liam's strength, his ability to hold space without filling it. Later that afternoon, a letter arrived. No return address, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Judith. I stood at the kitchen counter, unopened envelope in hand, for longer than I care to admit. When I finally read it, I did so slowly. I don't ask for forgiveness. But I know I was wrong. About you. About everything. If silence was my shield, it also became my weapon. I'm sorry for that. There were more words, carefully chosen, heavy with guilt, but I folded the page after the second paragraph. I placed it into the fireplace, struck a match, and watched it curl into ash. Not out of spite, but because I no longer needed her to say the right things for me to be okay. Forgiveness wasn't the goal. Balance was. Connor stopped by before sunset, briefcase in hand, expression softer than usual. Your name is clear. The affidavit's filed. Everything's signed, sealed, and irrevocable, he said. Good, I replied, handing him a small envelope. Inside, the check for his services. He tucked it away without looking. You sure you're done fighting? I was never fighting, I said. I was reclaiming. We stood in silence, facing the living room. It's rare, he added, to see someone stop just before the finish line when revenge is still on the table. I shrugged. That wasn't the table I sat at. He smiled just a little. You'll be fine. After he left, I wandered the house barefoot, letting my fingers trail the edges of the new paint, the smooth lines of restored surfaces. Not to inspect, just to feel. When I passed the hallway mirror, I stopped. For the first time in a long time, I didn't avoid my reflection. I met my own eyes straight on. You're not broken, I whispered to the woman staring back. You're just returning. Later that night, I checked my email. Among the usual newsletters and junk mail, one subject line caught my eye: fall gathering, guest speaker invitation. It was from the Veterans Outreach Center. The body of the message was short. We've followed your service and read about your return. We'd be honored if you'd speak at our fall gathering. Let us know if you're interested. I didn't reply immediately, but I didn't delete it either. They called me a freeloader. Now the house has my name on it and my story inside it. The hall was small. Nothing grand, nothing ceremonial. Just a few rows of folding chairs lined up beneath soft amber lighting and a makeshift podium set in front of a weathered American flag. Outside, the afternoon sun of late November clung to the edges of the window panes, casting golden streaks across the parquet floor. I waited behind the curtain, my palms resting on the cool wood of the sidewall. My name had been printed on the program. Keynote speaker, Elena Dawson. I stared at it for a moment before folding it in half. You ready? Liam asked, voice low but steady. He stood just off to the side, close enough to feel like an anchor, far enough to let me breathe. I nodded. The applause came before I even stepped out, courtesy, more than recognition, but I accepted it anyway. The microphone buzzed softly as I adjusted it. Hi, I began, letting the room settle. My name is Elena Dawson. I served overseas for 8 years. But that's not the only war I fought. Silence, curious, and quiet. There are battles that don't come with uniforms. Ones that happen in kitchens, in courtrooms, in our own heads. Battles we don't always win cleanly, but we survive them anyway. No one moved. No one interrupted. I used to think home was just a place, a structure, something with walls and windows and a name on the deed. But the truth is, home is built by memory, by choice, and sometimes by reclaiming what others tried to erase. I let that sit. I don't want to talk about betrayal today. Not really. I want to talk about rebuilding, because healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering with power. A beat. There was a time I walked back into a house that no longer had a place for me. The photos were gone. My room was gone. Even my name had started to disappear. But I didn't. That line landed. I could feel it. The applause at the end wasn't thunderous, but it was sincere. It wrapped around me like a slow-moving tide, enough to make me steady, not swept away. When I stepped down, Liam rose from the front row, meeting me halfway, with a soft hand on my shoulder. No words. Just presence. Outside, I slipped into my car and pulled onto the main road. The sky had softened to lavender, the trees along the sidewalk throwing long shadows over the asphalt. I passed the old house without slowing. The windows were dark. The lawn trimmed. Empty now, but still standing. I didn't feel the need to stop because nothing there held me anymore. Not like it used to. In the rearview mirror, I caught a glimpse of myself. No longer hunched. No longer searching. Chin high. Eyes clear. Justice isn't loud, I murmured as I turned the corner. It walks with you when no one else does. My phone buzzed on the seat beside me. One new message. Connor, that nonprofit board. They want you to chair it. I stared at the screen for a moment, then I typed one word. Yes. Justice didn't arrive with fireworks. It arrived in the quiet when no one expected it. They tried to erase me, but I rebuilt myself in the spaces they thought I'd abandoned. Like the final chord of a long-forgotten melody, justice may arrive late, but it resonates powerfully once it's heard. No wall of lies can stand forever against the tide of truth. If this story moved you, like, share and comment below. Type 1 if you felt seen, or 2 if something left you wanting more.